Well, let's open up our Sabbath School class with prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time we can come to your house of worship one more day. We ask you to be with us as we study the end of Genesis. It's such a rewarding finish to a book that has so much in it, but yet we look forward to the day when we can all join in together in a home. Because we realize, as in Genesis, this is not our home either. We thank you in your name. Amen. Well, I'd like to welcome everybody here today. Not only do we have people in the audience here, but we have people online as well. So in understanding that people are online, obviously everything I say they get to hear. Everything you say doesn't go through the microphone, so I always have the last option to correct you and make the people online hear what I have to say. But other than that, if you think that I'm repeating everything that you say, it's so that the audience on the online know what you're saying. So sometimes I will rephrase what you say. But anyway, so let's get into Israel and Egypt, the last lesson of this quarter, the end of Genesis. Memory text. So Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen, and they had possessions there and grew and multiplied exceedingly. Genesis 47:27. Now, each one of these days asks us to read a full chapter, and that's what each day of our lesson is on a full chapter. Now, I don't think we have time to read the full chapter. Each chapter, that'd be 5 days of chapters. So trying to get through all of this. But we're starting in Genesis 46. Genesis chapter 46. Now it's beginning with, Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba, which is Bethlehem in the old, and offered sacrifices to the God of his father, Isaac. Okay. So, we've already studied the whole deal with Jacob's sons going down to Egypt, finding out Joseph is alive, asking that the family come. Now Jacob starts his journey by going to Beersheba and offering a sacrifice. Any coincidence in that? Location. Anything of coincidence? Of anything of interest? Both Abraham and Isaac also built altars there. And most likely, while he was passing by, there probably was the remnants of those altars there. So, in following the custom of his father and his grandfather, he also built an altar there. Then God spoke to Israel in the visions of the night and said, "Jacob, Jacob." And he said, "Here I am. I am God, the God of your father, and do not fear to go down to Egypt, for I will make of you a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again, and Joseph will put his hand on your eyes." Okay, so how do you think Jacob is feeling at this time? Now we're into the second year of the drought, as Joseph had prophesied to Pharaoh, 7 years of good, plentiful years, 7 years of famine. We're into 2 years into the famine. Jacob sent his sons down there to go get food. How many times they go down? 3 times? The famine is still exceedingly bad. Don't you think Jacob would want to get out and get away from this famine? But yet, God here says, Jacob, you do not need to fear. Why do you think Jacob is fearing? Anything? Any idea why Jacob? They already know the food is in Egypt. That's where the storehouses are at. That's where everybody's going. We'll find that a little bit later. We realize that the way that Joseph acquired so much land for Egypt is that as the years progressed, the 3rd and the 4th year, people would come to Joseph and say, even back in Canaan, people would come to Joseph because he was person in charge. They would come and say, we can't even feed our cattle. Will you buy our cattle and give us bread? Sure enough, he bought a lot of cattle. Made Pharaoh rich. Then they came the next year. We can't even feed ourselves. Will you take our land, not only in Canaan, but in all of Egypt? People came to Pharaoh, came to Joseph and said, we can't even feed ourselves anymore. Will you buy our land and we'll be your servants? Well, Joseph did. He took the land into possession, but he allowed them to stay on the property and to continue to plant. But 20% of all of the harvest went to Pharaoh. It was recorded about this time, historically, during this time, that Egypt became ownership of most of the ground in all of Egypt, except for the land of Goshen. It was under the ownership of Pharaoh, but Pharaoh allowed the priests to retain their land and never took their land. So all the Egyptian priests continued to keep their land, but all the other land pretty much went to Pharaoh. Historically, we know that. Facts. So it's of interest that when Jacob and all the family came, where'd they go? Pharaoh says, well, I got plenty of land. Go to the land of Goshen. Gave it to him. So, historically, things are happening. Okay, so back to Jacob. What's the fear? It's the uncertainty. What's down there? His favorite son is down there. Why not go running down there? Why is he fearful?
He's leaving the land of promise.
Leaving the land of promise. Okay. But yet his son is down there. Roy? The promised land. Okay, the promised land. Well, Abraham went down to Egypt, didn't he? What happened then? Abraham feared for his life. Told Sarah, if anybody asks you, you're my sister. And the Pharaoh at that time took Sarah. And there was persecution in Pharaoh's house. Not persecution, but there was a lot of things happen. Plagues. Things weren't good for Abraham and Sarah down there. They were underneath a lot of duress. Pharaoh scolded them and said, you get out of here, you leave, you take all your possessions, you get out of here. Anyway, Jacob remembered that. His grandfather went down to Egypt one time. It wasn't a good occurrence. Abraham barely left with his life and his wife. Okay? Jacob is fearing the uncertainty. Jacob is fearing, if I get down there, will I be under duress? His sons weren't treated fairly. No, they weren't. They weren't treated fairly. They understood, Jacob understood the 3 times they went down, that there was money came back, cup came back, and then you're messing with a government that is extremely big, authoritative, has the Egyptian government pretty much has control of Canaan. It's a satellite country of Egypt. There's a lot of uncertainty. And he is taking everything and moving. What is he? 130 years old. He's 130 years old when he came into Egypt and lived 17 years in Egypt. He's 130. Yeah, he's an old man. Doesn't know what's going to happen. But God here says, I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again. What is that implying? Somehow, some way. Somehow, some way. And then it says, and Joseph will put his hand on your eyes. What's that saying? There's prophecy here. Okay. But it also says, if we go to, is it chapter 49, where Jacob passes away, Joseph is there at his bed. Joseph is the last person Jacob sees. Joseph probably literally closes his eyes in death, because Joseph has given his promise to take care of him and to take him back to his home. So, I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will surely bring you up again. Joseph and the rest of Joseph's brothers keeps that promise by bringing him back to the land of Canaan to be buried, and Joseph literally probably was the one that closed his eyes at death. Okay? So they took their livestock and their goods, and they acquired, which they had acquired in the land of Canaan, and went to Egypt. Jacob and all his descendants. And it goes through all of these sons, and then it lists some of the grandchildren. How many women are listed in here, in the descendants? Anybody ever give that consideration? Only 2. Dinah is one. You remember the story of Dinah. Shechem was massacred because of Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. And then there is one granddaughter of Jacob that is listed. But obviously there were more women in the family than this. But a lot of the women, a lot of the daughters, and maybe even a lot of the granddaughters are already married, and they're probably staying in Canaan. They were married into different families. And they are not counted as family members because they have been married into another family, and now they're counted as that separate family, so they're not counted in the genealogy here. 66, well, actually 70 went down. 70 went down. Luke, interesting fact, Luke in Acts says 75. Well, he adds 5 grandchildren of Joseph in Acts chapter 7, I think. So the genealogy here, they head down. And the lesson asks, what is the significance of Jacob's departure from Canaan? What is the significance? I think it goes back to the whole basic idea. Why was Jacob fearful? It's because he was leaving the land of his forefathers, Abraham and Isaac, the land that Abraham was promised, the land that Isaac spent his whole life in. And now they're leaving, taking everything, all their possessions. They're leaving. The significance is, one more time, as Abraham left Ur and traveled to a foreign country, now Jacob and his whole family and all of his possessions as Abraham left Ur. Now Jacob is leaving Canaan, going to Egypt, starting out following the promise of God. Following the promise of God. Jacob settles in Egypt. Monday's lesson, Genesis chapter 47. Then Joseph went and told Pharaoh and said, "My father and my brothers, their flocks and their herds and all their possessions, and all that they possess, have come from the land of Canaan. And indeed, they are in the land of Goshen." Now, previous to this, chapter 46, I want to bring to light here. It says, verse 31 in chapter 46, "Then Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go up and tell Pharaoh and say to him, my brothers and those of my father's house who were in the land of Canaan have come to me. And the men are shepherds, and their occupation has been to feed livestock. And they have brought their flocks, their herds, and all that they have. So it shall be, when Pharaoh calls you and says, what is your occupation, that you shall say, your servant's occupation has been with livestock from our youth even till now, both we and also our fathers, that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination of the Egyptians." Was Joseph ashamed of his family? Now, it says in there, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. So was Joseph ashamed of his family in front of Pharaoh? Okay. So it wasn't, Joseph was trying to protect them from being vulnerable in a higher positions, trying to keep them out of the servitude to Pharaoh in the hierarchy, the political hierarchy. That very last phrase, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. We take it to believe that Moses, when he wrote these books, that he put that in there. Not necessarily that Joseph spoke this, but Moses wrote this. Now, historically, there is pictographs in the Egyptian in Egyptian walls and in different areas of shepherds being characterized as being degenerates, ugly, defiled, naked. I mean, they weren't given a very glamorous identity. Culturally, that's the way they were derived later on, most likely. So Moses added this, but yet, as you said, Joseph was trying to protect them, knowing that they were vulnerable and could easily be swayed into evil situations. So to keep them out of the political area, political scheme of life, was best. To keep them isolated away from the rest of the Egyptian government, to keep them isolated as a family and to keep them there was best. Norma? Yes. Yeah. It was the most fertile. It was the most suited for running cattle, sheep, everything else. It was the best. Well, during this time preceding this, within time, the government acquired this ground. Pharaoh acquired this ground. And maybe the most fertile ground was Pharaoh's already, was the government's ground. We don't believe that Pharaoh just uprooted Egyptian natives and said, you get out of here, someone else is moving in. It was most likely the governments anyway, the most fertile. They could have, yes. They could have. As the drought continued, we're only into the second year of the drought. It's the second year of 7 years. God works in miraculous ways, and all events happening in a very ordered fashion. And we'll get to that here shortly. This whole Joseph story, the fact that at 17 he was sold into slavery, and now is at this point, he's how old was he when his father come to live in Egypt? He was 30 years of age when he became, when he got out of prison. He was 30 years old. 7 years of plentiful years had gone, and now 2 years famine. Joseph is 39 years old. So he's sold into slavery at 17. Now at 39, his family's coming to live, and he has the advantage to say, you're going to live in the best place. Pharaoh gives him that option. I want your family to live in the best place. So you think about it. From the age of 17 to now he's 39, and within that time, God made it available that the whole family of Jacob was going to live in the land of Goshen. So you think, well, does God, by some means, the land was available for Jacob and his family. So in 47, that Joseph went and told Pharaoh and said, my father and my brothers, their flocks and their herds, and all they possess have come. So Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, saying, your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Have your father and your brothers dwell in the best of the land. So we see that. And so it goes on. Joseph deals with the famine. This is how he deals. So it says, and Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan for the grain which they had bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. And as more people come, and this is where, as I stated, as the drought continued, the famine continued, people would come and say, we can't feed our herds of livestock. Can you buy them from us and give us bread? And so Pharaoh accrued great amounts of livestock. And then he started gaining ground, because people would come back and say, well, next year, or they come back and say, we can't even live. We ran through the money that you gave us by selling our livestock, now buy our land. So Joseph here is continuing for another 5 years. Joseph, during the time that Jacob and his family is here, Joseph's still dealing with the 5 years of famine, and it's getting worse and worse the whole time. So 5 years is taken up of Joseph's time dealing with this famine as Jacob and his brothers live in the best land along the Nile, the best land. It says in Monday's lesson, what spiritual truths and principles can we find in this account of chapter 47, and the whole chapter 47? What spiritual truths and principles can we find in this chapter? Is there anything in the chapter 47 that really brings to light spiritual truths, promises? Anything? Anything that anybody has in chapter 47? Joseph here is continuing to be a political advisor to Pharaoh. He is, at this time, like I said, when Jacob come to live, he's 39 years old. To recap that, he sold into slavery at 17. That's in Genesis. He was, it says here in Genesis, he was 30 years of age when he was brought in front of Pharaoh to interpret the dream. Preceding that, it said that 2 years had passed, that when Joseph interpreted the butler's and the cook's dream, the baker's and the butler's dream, after that, 2 years went by. But we know he was in prison probably for at least a year before that, so he's in prison for 3 years. And so before that, he was Potiphar's servant for 10 years. 10 years of servitude for Potiphar. That makes him 27. 3 years in prison goes by. Now he's 30, standing in front. So now he's 39. He is number 2 in all Egypt. He is dealing with this famine. He is gaining great wealth for Pharaoh. And his whole family is there watching. For 5 years, Joseph takes control and saves Egypt and the surrounding countries. And his family is there watching. Jacob is watching his son. The son that he had lost. Now, he's watching this son do great things. It's astonishing. It's amazing. These last few chapters of Genesis, they might be somewhat boring. We go through the genealogy, but we're going to get into that here a little bit later. We're going to study, and these last few chapters of Genesis is amazing. It's the climax to Genesis, these last few chapters. Tuesday's lesson, Genesis 48. Now, at the end of 47, talks about Jacob. In verse 28, and Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the length of Jacob's life was 147 years. When the time drew near that Israel must die, he called his son Joseph and said to him, now if I have found favor in your sight, please put your hand under my thigh and deal kindly and truly with me. Please do not bury me in Egypt, but let me lie with my fathers. You shall carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place. And he said, I will do as you have said. Then he said, swear to me. And he swore to him. And Israel bowed himself on the head of the bed. Jacob is getting old. He's reaching the extent of his life. Yes. So those from 13 on to 26 in chapter 47 talks about how Joseph dealt with the famine. And he did. He did come up with that. It was him that put that into law. As they came and said, we can no longer live, the famine's continuing, will you take our property? And so he did. He took their property, put it into government possession. But he said, now this was to all the inhabitants of Egypt. You can continue to live. They're almost like serfs, in the European area. So you can continue to live. You can continue to farm. You just give 20% of the harvest to the government. You can retain the rest for planting the next year and for food for you and your family. And you can continue to live on the property and do as you wish, but 20%. It's taxation is what it became. It's almost like taxation. So, no, he didn't. They were continued to live there. The families continued to live on that property. The family heritage was on that property, and the family could continue to live on that property, but it was the government's. It was the Egyptian government's, but the family retained it, and they could continue to live and continue to work it as long as they gave 20% to the government. And the other 80% was retained for their benefit and to reseed it the next year. So it's amazing. Joseph, again, Like I said, we go from an individual, 17 years old, sold into slavery, 10 years in Potiphar, 3 years in prison, and it just goes, and now these last chapters are showing the climax of how God put Joseph, a little kid who was making the rest of his family extremely upset, because he probably, as we study Joseph, he wasn't a humble individual at 17. He was a little pompous, telling all the rest of the family about all of his dreams all the time, and he probably was that little brother that was always bothering the older brothers, okay? So, but now we're at the end of these chapters, and we're seeing 10 years of servitude to Potiphar, 3 years in prison. This done a lot to Joseph. It made him think. He's been on his own 13 years until he's in Pharaoh's political hierarchy at the age of 30. And now he's in charge for those 7 years of storing up all the food for 7 years. And now we're seeing the famine here. And Joseph is the one coming up with these laws. Through God's grace, no doubt about it. And he was. And we see that especially when he was in prison, when he gives all the glory to God for being able to explain the dreams, explain the dreams to not only the baker and the cupbearer, the butler. And then when he comes out of prison, after 3 years in prison, he goes in front of Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, you can interpret my dream. And Joseph says, no, I can't, but the God in heaven can. Okay, so, yeah, it's amazing. These last chapters are bringing to light a tremendous amount of information about Joseph and what God has done. And what God has done. We're going to get a little bit more into that here shortly. It says and when Jacob blesses, so in 48, chapter 48, again, we can't read through it all, take up too much of our time. So here in chapter 48, it's talking about Joseph and his sons Manasseh and Ephraim, Manasseh being the oldest. Now to go through this real quick, Jacob, knowing he is about to die, asks to see his sons, asks for Joseph to come. So he does, he goes, and Jacob, his eyesight is very poor, because he says, who is with you? And Joseph says, well, these are my two sons. So Joseph, he takes his two sons, as it is shown, as it's recorded in the Bible, has Manasseh here on the left, Ephraim on the right, and he pushes them forward towards Jacob, because in turn, that would be, Manasseh would be on Jacob's right, Ephraim would be, so the idea is the right hand is to bless, and of course, what did Jacob do? And we already know that Jacob's eyesight has diminished so much that the two boys here, we assume they'd be early teens probably, 10, 12 years old at the youngest. They are standing there, but Jacob can't see him. And so when Joseph takes him and pushes him forward towards Jacob, Jacob goes like this, puts his right hand on Ephraim, left hand on Manasseh, and that sort of startles Joseph. Oh, no, Dad, no. Going about this the wrong way. What does Jacob do? I know, Joseph. I know what I'm doing. And that from that point on. Now in this blessing, what else does Jacob do? Pretty much brings him in close in his family and pretty much portrays that they are his kids in the blessing. Now they're part of the genealogy. 12 tribes. You have Ephraim and Manasseh. It's all coming to an end here. It's all coming to an end. And it is. these, again, like I said, these last chapters, there's so much going on. For the future, there's so much going on here that but yet it's happening with just a few individuals. Jacob crossing his arms like this, even though his eyesight is diminished, he knows, I'm not blessing the oldest, but I'm blessing the youngest here, Ephraim. Ephraim gets the blessing. So, it's all happening here at the end. Joseph's two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, are the only grandsons that Jacob blessed. They are thus elevated from the status of grandsons to the status of sons. Chapter 48, verse 5. And now your two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. As Reuben and Simeon, they shall be mine. He took them into his immediate family. Although Jacob's blessing implies the preeminence of the second, Ephraim, over the first, Manasseh, Jacob's blessing essentially concerns Joseph. So we're seeing this, building up to the climax here. Building up to the climax. Going on to Wednesday's lesson. Jacob blesses his sons. Genesis 49. And Jacob called his sons and said, gather together that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days. So here, and for the next 20-some verses, we get the prophecy of what's going to happen with these sons. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity and excellency of power, unstable as water, you shall not excel because you went up to your father's bed. What's this? What happened there? He went to Bilhah, slept with Bilhah, his father's concubine. Okay. Then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Instruments of cruelty are in their habitation. Now, back to Reuben. Reuben does not become a great nation, as it implies here. Reuben, you are my first in my might and beginning of my strength, the excellent dignity and the excellent power. Unstable as water, you shall not excel because you went up. Okay, Reuben, after the Israelites come out of Egypt, a couple hundred years later, Reuben's genealogy, Reuben's family does not excel. They do not become a great nation. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Instruments of cruelty are in their habitation. Let not my soul enter their council. Let not my honor be united to their assembly. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they hamstrung an ox. And that is city of Shechem. They went in there. They murdered everybody, and Jacob was distressed about that. He was upset. Hamstrung an ox, they slaughtered most of the cattle. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. They don't become great nation. Levi, what happens with the tribe of Levi? Priests. Okay, they're not a big nation, but they are given privilege. Now, it shows that not only in this, and sometimes a curse, a blessing can come out of a curse, because out of the tribe of Levi came the priests. But yet here, Jacob is saying, Simeon and Levi, your tribes are not going to excel. They're not going to be great. Judah, you are he whom your brother shall praise. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He bows down. He lies down as a lion, and as a lion who shall rouse him. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the people, binding his donkey to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine and his teeth whiter than milk. Judah gets a very lengthy blessing here. What comes out of Judah? Messiah. And that's implied here as being Shiloh. Until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the people. The promise of the Messiah. Okay? The scepter shall not depart from Judah. So we get prophecy here, talking about the coming Messiah. Zebulun, Issachar. Issachar is a strong donkey lying down between two burdens. He saw that rest was good. Okay, Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be the serpent by the way, a viper of the path that bites the horse's heels so that its rider shall fall backward. Okay, it goes on, and then Joseph. Joseph is a fruitful bough, a fruitful bough by a well. His branches run over the wall. Joseph here gets a tremendous blessing. Tremendous blessing. But his bow remained in strength, and the arms of his hand were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel, by the God of your father who will help you, and by the Almighty who will bless you, with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lies beneath, blessings of the beasts in the womb. The blessings of your father have excelled the blessings of my ancestors, up to the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him who is separate from his brothers. Okay. A great blessing there. So we see that they're blessed. There's curses. There is evidence of Jacob knowing that some of his sons are not going to excel in the future. That they're his descendants through his sons are not going to excel. So, finishing Genesis chapter 49. Then he charged them and said to them, I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephraim, the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, and is before Mamre in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field of Ephraim the Hittite as a possession for a burial place. There they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife. And there I buried Leah. The field and the cave that is there were purchased from the sons of Heth. And when Jacob had finished commanding his sons, he drew his feet up into the bed and breathed his last and was gathered to his people. Okay. How old is Jacob? 147. Okay. Joseph is 59 years old now. He's 59. 56. He's 56 years old now. He's 56. So we see Jacob again asks his sons to take him back. And it says, chapter 50, then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. And it goes back to what we had already talked about in chapter 46, when God says, I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again. And Joseph will put his hand on your eyes. It's coming to an end here. It's coming to an end. There is the last chapter, 50, talks about Joseph taking his father's body back to Canaan. They're burying them, Joseph and his brothers. Now, Joseph is the only one here that is really given a great description of remorse. Now, it's not to say that the brothers didn't have remorse, but it's just giving Joseph's perception, Joseph's story here. Now, the brothers took an extreme devotion to take Jacob back as well. And we see the procession, we see the large procession that took the body back. Pharaoh said, gave him tremendous political advisors and high-ranking individuals all to go back. It was a large event. It was a large event. Now, to finish the story out, I like to bring into discussion in regards to this whole deal with Joseph and the prophecy in it. And a lot of this is in these last couple chapters, but it's spread out through the Bible. Let me just ask this, and I've talked to you about this before. How many years were the children of Israel in the land of Egypt? We had this discussion before. Now several years ago, when my youngest son was in school, a non-denominational Christian school here in the Rapid City area, in Bible class they were studying Moses, and so I brought it to light the regards to how many years was the children of Israel in Egypt. Now, we all know the numbers of 430 years and 400 years. There's 430 years. 430 years. Is it in Galatians? Galatians chapter 3 says 430 years from the time of the promise of the seed to the law given at Mount Sinai. 430 years. Okay? So, but then in Genesis it talks about 400 years will your descendants be in a foreign land. And be under rule. Okay, so a lot of times people take that to mean that the children of Israel, that the Israelites were in Egypt for 400 years. But no. They were only in from the time that Jacob came to Egypt, from the time that Moses left with the children of Israel, was only 215 years. Okay, we take that in consideration because in Acts, it's not in Acts, but in Galatians, it says 430 years from the promise of the seed, from when God went to Abraham in chapter 12 of Genesis and said, your seed is going to be great. 430 years later, the law was given. 430 years. So if you go into the time frame, 215 years from that point, Jacob goes to live in Egypt. Okay, so we're not going to have this whole study, but I'm trying to build to this. So I told my younger son about this whole situation. I laid it out. I mean, and one interesting aspect is from the time that they enter into a foreign land, it will be the fourth generation will come out. I think that is in Genesis chapter 15, I believe. Fourth generation. Well, Jacob had a son, Levi. Levi had a son, Kohath, and that is in chapter 46. It talks about the genealogy of Jacob that went to live in Egypt. Levi's son was Kohath. Kohath had Amram, and Amram was Moses' dad. 4 generations. Now, Amram married his father's sister. So, Levi's daughter, now Levi's daughter is not recorded as going to live in Egypt, but yet she was born shortly after, which was Moses' mom. Okay, so beyond that, so 4th generation, it all goes into, and I was explaining this whole deal to my son, Cord, saying, isn't this amazing? So a lot of times people confuse that the children of Israel were in the land of Egypt for 400 years, but I says, no. From the time that Jacob went and lived in Egypt. 215 years goes by when Moses leaves. Moses is 80 years old when Joseph, when the children of Israel leave. 80 years old. That's in the Bible. It says he's 80 years old when he went to talk to Pharaoh. When him and Aaron went to talk to Pharaoh, he's 80 years old. That's when the children of Israel left. 80 years. Joseph lived to be 110 years old. There's only roughly, how many years was it? There was approximately 64 years from the death of Joseph to the birth of Moses. Literally. From the death of Joseph to the birth of Moses is 64 years. It's in the Bible. You look at it, it's all there. 64 years have gone by from the time that Moses is born, from the time that Joseph has died. It's not that long. And so I was telling my younger son about this whole thing. And I says, this adds a lot of light to what you're studying here. 64 years, 215 years from the time Jacob went to live till the time Moses left with the children of Israel. Only 215 years. And so he went and talked to a Bible teacher, and he explained that. His Bible teacher says, oh, nope, that's wrong. Nope, that's wrong. And, can't happen. Couldn't happen. And Cord came home and told me about it. And I thought, can't happen? But we believe in the crossing of the Red Sea. We believe in Daniel in the lion's den. We believe about the 3 Hebrew children in the fiery furnace, and then there's 4. We believe that. But yet when we say, well, there's only 64 years from the death of Joseph to the birth of Moses, but yet there is, how many people leave Egypt? Approximately 1 million people. How can 70 people that go to live in Egypt 215 years later, now there's all 1 million people? No, can't happen. Can't happen. And I wasn't, and this isn't a salvation issue to believe what I'm telling you. It's not. But yet what was upsetting to me is, why is it that you can take the story of Daniel in the lion's den and say, oh, a miracle happened? Why is it that you can take the story of the 3 Hebrews in a fiery furnace and all of a sudden there's one more, oh, a miracle happened? But yet when you look at the study here, these last few chapters of Genesis, and you look about what's actually happened, and there's so much that had to happen in order for Joseph even to rise to power, to become second in command of all Egypt. A Semitic boy in the land of Egypt rise second in command. Everything was working. I could go into the historical aspect of why Joseph rose to power, because there was a different government there that was also a Semitic nomadic tribe that had infiltrated into Egypt several years, quite a few years before Joseph come in, and they were a Semitic culture that grew up, that gained power, and now that Pharaoh is Semitic, and now a Semitic boy comes out of prison and interprets a dream, and now he's made. It all had to happen. God had made things happen. And so when what's frustrating is when someone says, yeah, but you got to read the whole Bible to really understand the amazing aspects of what God does. Nope. I can only look at what says right here that Daniel went into the lion's den and Daniel came out. That's the miracle. I can read about the 3 Hebrews children that went in, and then there's 4. That's the miracle. I can read about the crossing the Red Sea. Now that's a miracle. But when you say, yeah, but you need to study from beginning to end to really understand what God can do. Oh, no. We're not going to go there. We only read the real miracles that are right there and obvious. That's the amazing thing, God. And you think, wait a minute. You're not allowing yourself to truly understand the capabilities of what God can do. This whole story of Joseph and how he has rose to power, and now that his family comes to live, and that Joseph dies, and only 64 years later, Moses is born, and 80 years later, 1 million people are walking out of Egypt from 70 people. People say, oh no, that can't happen. Thinking, wait a minute. Are you saying you don't want to study the Bible and realize what all God can do? It's in there. Don't diminish the possibility to study and see all the amazing things God can do, because it takes so many verses to comprehend everything. There were 64 years from the death of Joseph. From his death, 64 years later, Moses is born. Okay, so I don't want to take up everybody's time, but just real quickly, 215 years from the time that Jacob entered into Egypt. 215 years later, Moses leaves. Okay, Moses is 80 years old when he leaves. So subtract 80 from 215. Okay, so Joseph is 39 when his father comes to live. Joseph is 56 when his father dies. Joseph lives to be 110 years old. That's 54 years later? 54 years. So in adding all the years, that's how. I'll show you here after Sabbath school. I don't want to take up everybody's time because we're just about out of time. Any questions on all those numbers? I mean, it's trying to, you'd have to write it all down because then it gets confusing. But here's the deal. These last few chapters of Genesis, you might say, well, it's just the end of the chapter. But yet, it's an amazing way that God brings things together. It's amazing when you study Joseph and Jacob and that whole most of Genesis, how it all had to function in order for God to be able to save this family. Many things had to happen. And then to come out of Egypt after 215 years with 1 million people, you think, your first thought is, well, couldn't happen. Well, it's there. It's there. It's in the Bible. And a lot of times some people say, well, if it's not specific right here in this chapter, I don't think I have to study the whole Bible in order to try and gain an understanding. But sometimes we don't allow the opportunity to study to understand the full emphasis of what God has provided. So, like I said at the very beginning, my mic is on, and the whole everybody on the online gets to hear me. Is there anything that we didn't bring to light here at the climax of Joseph and Jacob? Is there anything else that brings a lot of emphasis to this whole story? The amazing thing that I keep looking at is Joseph, at age 17, sold into slavery, 10 years in Potiphar, 3 years in jail, prison, 7 years of good famine, good times, 7 years, 2 years of bad before his dad comes. Works 5 years to acquire great wealth for Pharaoh, builds a tremendous political dynasty. And it's all because God had a plan. That's the basic. It's all because God had a plan. And we're just talking about a few chapters here, but to fully understand the full view. Now, you go to Psalms. I think it's in Psalms chapter 3, I believe. It says that sometimes we think that Joseph went into prison and it was good times for Joseph, because it says that his first year there, that the jailer, the head of the jailer, made him Joseph in control of everything. But yet you go to Psalms and it says that his feet were whipped with fetters. He was persecuted in jail. But it takes that verse out of Psalms to truly understand the life of Joseph. It takes more verses than what Genesis has to truly understand. And then so that's why I say, study it all. Gain the understanding. Understand what God can do. Not only for a 17-year-old boy, but for the rest of us. Let's end with prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for the time we can study your word and we can open it up and we can look through the many passages of Scripture to gain an understanding of how marvelous you are. Not only in these lives of the forefathers, but yet we know the miracles continue to work around us today. We know there is a plan, and we ask that we put our lives in that plan. Let us be there with you at the end of time. We thank you in your name. Amen.